The town was small and quiet, surrounded by green fields that looked golden when the sun went down. The people there lived simple lives. Most of them worked in shops or farms, and everyone knew everyone else. In one of the narrow streets of that town, a small boy lived with his mother in a tiny house that had cracked walls and an old wooden door. The boy's name was Ethan. He was thin, quiet, and always carried a look of thoughtfulness in his eyes. He did not have many friends. Most children liked to play outside, run around, or talk loudly, but Ethan liked silence. He liked to listen to the sound of the wind and the rustle of leaves. He liked to listen to anything that had rhythm, anything that sounded like music. His mother worked in a bakery. Every morning she would leave early and come back late at night, her hands covered with flour, her back aching from standing all day. She was gentle but tired. Their life was not easy, but she tried her best to keep Ethan happy. He never asked for toys or fancy clothes. All he ever wanted was time to sit near the piano that stood in the corner of the old community hall near their house. It was broken and missing a few keys, but for Ethan, it was the most magical thing in the world. He had found that piano one day after school. The hall was used for town meetings and local events, but during the day it was empty. The door was never locked, and the caretaker didn't mind the boy coming in quietly. The piano was covered with dust and looked like it hadn't been played for years. The first time he pressed a key, the sound was faint and uneven, but it still filled him with a strange warmth. He started visiting the hall every day after school, brushing off the dust and pressing keys carefully. He didn't know how to read music or what the notes meant. He only played by ear, trying to copy the tunes he heard on the radio or from the street musicians who sometimes visited town. Little by little, he began to make his own melodies. He didn't think about what was right or wrong. He just played what he felt. If he was sad, the notes were slow and heavy. If he was happy, they were light and fast. When his mother worked late, he played quietly, pretending the piano could listen to him better than any person. He felt the piano understood things words couldn't say. One day, the town received big news. A famous orchestra director named Mr. Rowland was coming to visit. He was well known across the country for finding young talent and turning them into stars. He was strict, proud, and known for his high standards. The local school decided to host an audition for children who could sing or play instruments. Whoever impressed him the most would be offered a place in his music training program in the city. The teachers were excited, and the students couldn't stop talking about it. Everyone wanted to be seen, to be chosen. When Ethan heard about it, his heart beat fast. He didn't even think of joining at first. He knew he had no formal training, no fancy clothes, no teacher. But that night, when he sat at the old piano and let his fingers wander, he thought, maybe this was his only chance. He looked at his mother when she came home and said softly that he wanted to try. She was surprised at first, but when she saw the determination in his eyes, she nodded and smiled tiredly. If you believe in it, she said, then go ahead. Just be yourself. The day of the audition arrived. The school auditorium was decorated with banners and bright lights. Parents sat proudly in the audience. The children looked polished and confident, wearing neat clothes and holding instruments that shined under the stage lights. Some tuned their violins, others warmed up their voices. Ethan stood near the back of the hall holding his breath. His clothes were plain and his shoes were worn out. He felt out of place. Mr. Rowland entered with his assistants. He wore a dark suit and walked with the kind of confidence that made everyone straighten their backs. He greeted the teachers briefly, then sat down with a clipboard in hand. His expression was serious, his eyes sharp. The auditions began. One by one, students went on stage. A girl sang a classical piece, her voice clear and practiced. A boy played the violin, fast and skillful. The director nodded, taking notes, sometimes smiling politely, sometimes showing no emotion at all. The audience clapped after every performance. Ethan watched closely, feeling smaller and smaller with each act. When his name was called, there was a murmur in the crowd. Some students turned to look at him with smirks. One whispered to another, "He's that quiet boy who never talks to anyone." Another giggled, "He's going to embarrass himself." Ethan felt his stomach twist, but he took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. The old piano stood there, large and shiny, not like the one he practiced on. He had never touched such a perfect instrument before. His hands trembled slightly. Before he could start, one of the teachers whispered something to Mr. Rowland. The director looked at Ethan and asked with a small laugh, "You can play the piano?" His tone was amused, almost teasing. The audience laughed along. "If he plays the piano," the director said with a grin, "I'll bow right here." The laughter grew louder, and Ethan felt his ears burn. But instead of walking away, he looked down at the keys. The hall went quiet for a moment as he sat on the stool. He didn't know what piece he would play. He just closed his eyes and let his fingers rest on the keys like he always did when he was alone. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, uncertain, but after a few seconds, something changed. His fingers found their rhythm and the sound filled the whole. It was not perfect. Some notes were uneven, some a little too loud, but there was something deep in the way he played. The music rose and fell like a heartbeat full of feeling. It spoke of loneliness and dreams, of quiet hope and hidden pain. The laughter stopped. The audience stared, caught off guard. The teachers exchanged looks, their faces softening. Even Mr. Rowland leaned forward slightly, his expression changing. He had expected a clumsy tune, but what he heard instead felt real, raw and beautiful in a way he couldn't explain. Ethan's small frame swayed slightly as he played, completely lost in the music. His eyes stayed closed. He was no longer in that hall. He was back in the community center with the broken piano, with the sound that had kept him company for years. When the last note faded, silence filled the room. Ethan slowly opened his eyes and looked up. No one moved for a few seconds. Then unexpectedly, the director stood up. His face was serious, but his eyes looked strangely soft. Without a word, he bowed slightly to the boy. The same audience that had laughed now sat frozen, not knowing whether to clap or stay quiet. Then one person began clapping, and soon the whole hall joined in. Ethan stood there overwhelmed. He didn't smile or cry. He just looked down at his hands as if realizing what they had done. After the performance, he quietly left the stage. His mother, who had come and watched from the back, wiped tears from her eyes. She had never seen so many people clapping for her son. Mr. Rowland called out to him before he could leave the hall. The crowd watched as the famous director walked toward the boy. "What's your name?" he asked in a calm voice. "Ethan," the boy said softly. "Ethan," the director repeated, nodding slowly. "You didn't learn that in any music school, did you?" Ethan shook his head. "I just play what I feel." The director looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Well," he said, "what you feel is something very few people can play." He turned to his assistants and said, "Write down his name." The crowd whispered in surprise as Ethan's name was added to the list. The boy didn't fully understand what was happening. He just stood there quietly, his heart pounding. The director looked at him again and said, "You have something rare. Don't lose it." When Ethan and his mother walked home that evening, the sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky with orange and pink. She held his hand tightly, proud and still a little in disbelief. Ethan didn't talk much on the way. His mind replayed the sound of the applause, the bow of the director, the feeling of his fingers on the keys. It all felt like a dream. That night when he went to bed, he couldn't sleep. He looked at the ceiling and smiled to himself. For the first time, he felt like maybe the world was bigger than his small town, that maybe music could take him somewhere beyond those quiet streets. He didn't know what would happen next, but something deep inside told him that his life had just changed forever. In the empty hall where he used to play, the old piano sat silently under the dim light from a broken window. Dust floated in the air and the room was still. If someone had been there, they might have thought they heard a faint sound, like a memory of the music that once filled that space, the song of a boy who played from the heart. When Ethan woke up the next morning, the world felt different. The sun shone through the small window, and even though his house was still the same, it didn't look as dull as before. The old wooden chair, the cracked wall, the tiny kitchen, everything seemed brighter somehow. His mother had already left for work, but she had left breakfast on the table, a small piece of bread and a note written in her careful handwriting. It said, "I'm proud of you." Ethan held that note for a long moment, smiling softly before he tucked it into his pocket. At school, things were not the same anymore. The same students who had laughed at him now looked at him differently. Some smiled politely. Some whispered to each other as he walked past. The teachers treated him with quiet respect. But Ethan didn't feel proud or proud-looking. He just felt unsure. He wasn't used to attention. He wanted to go back to how it was before, when it was only him and the piano and no eyes watching. That afternoon, as classes ended, the principal called him into the office. Mr. Rowland, the famous orchestra director, was waiting there with his assistants. The man greeted him with a smile that felt warmer than before. He said, "Ethan, I came to talk to your mother this morning. I want you to join our music training program in the city. You'll learn everything properly: music, performance, reading notes, everything. You have a gift, and I don't want it to fade away in this small town." Ethan's heart jumped, but his face stayed still. He wasn't sure what to say. He wanted to go, but he also thought about his mother, who worked so hard every day. He worried about leaving her alone. Mr. Rowland seemed to read his thoughts. He said gently, "Don't worry about expenses. Everything will be covered by our foundation. Your only job is to learn and play. That's all I ask." When his mother came to the office later, she looked nervous. Her hands fidgeted with her apron. The director spoke kindly to her, explaining everything, and when he said that the cost would be taken care of, her eyes filled with tears of relief. She looked at Ethan and nodded. "If this is what you want," she said softly, "then go. Don't worry about me. Just promise me you'll never forget where you came from." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. That night he packed his small bag. He didn't have much, just a few clothes, a small book of sketches, and the note his mother had written that morning. Before he left, he went to the community hall one last time. The old piano sat quietly in the corner, covered with dust again. He wiped it gently and played a soft tune, a goodbye melody that echoed through the empty hall. It was not sad, but not happy either. It was the sound of moving forward. The next day he boarded a bus with Mr. Rowland's assistant. His mother hugged him tightly before he got on, whispering, "Be brave. Don't give up." He watched her grow smaller through the window as the bus rolled away, until she disappeared behind the curve of the road. The city was loud, bright, and full of movement. Tall buildings stretched into the sky. Cars honked everywhere, and people moved fast as if every second mattered. Ethan felt small again, like he had stepped into another world. The music academy was a huge building with glass walls and long corridors. Students his age and older walked around carrying instruments or sheet music. Everyone seemed confident, focused, and professional. Mr. Rowland introduced him to the staff and showed him around. "This will be your new home for a while," he said. Ethan nodded quietly, trying to take it all in. He was given a small room with a single bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the city. That night he couldn't sleep. He could still hear the faint hum of cars and people outside. He missed his mother, the smell of the bakery, the sound of the countryside. But when he closed his eyes, he remembered the piano and the way it made him feel, and that gave him peace. The next morning, classes began. Ethan quickly realized how different things were here. The students were skilled. Some had been playing since they were 4 or 5 years old. They could read complex sheets of music easily, and their technique was perfect. Ethan struggled to keep up. When the teacher asked him to read notes, he hesitated. Some students smirked quietly. One boy whispered, "He's just a lucky country kid." During lunch breaks, Ethan often sat alone. He didn't know how to start conversations. He spent his free time in the practice rooms trying to learn faster, to understand the things others already knew. He studied how they placed their fingers, how they moved their hands, how they read the symbols on the paper. Every night, when the building emptied, he sneaked into the big hall and practiced on the grand piano. The security guard, an older man who had seen many students come and go, smiled when he saw him. "You've got something special, kid," he said one night. "Most of them play notes. You play feelings." Ethan didn't know how to respond, but the words stayed with him. Weeks passed. Mr. Rowland watched him closely, sometimes standing quietly in the corner during his practice sessions. He never interrupted, but afterward he would offer small advice. "Don't rush. Let the sound breathe," he'd say. Or, "The piano isn't something you control. You talk to it." Ethan listened carefully to every word. One evening, after a long day of lessons, Ethan was sitting by himself in the cafeteria when one of the older students, a girl who played the violin, sat across from him. She said, "I heard you play last week. That song, you wrote it yourself, right?" Ethan nodded. "It was beautiful," she said. "You should play it at the student showcase next month." He was surprised. He hadn't thought anyone was listening. For the first time since coming to the city, he smiled fully. The following weeks, he worked harder than ever. He learned to read music slowly, but he didn't let it change how he played. He still trusted his ear, his heart. Mr. Rowland watched the change in him and felt proud. But he also noticed how lonely the boy seemed, how much he carried inside without saying a word. One afternoon, the director called him to his office. He said, "You remind me of myself when I was young. But remember, music isn't about proving anything. It's about sharing what you feel." Ethan nodded. "Sometimes I'm afraid people will laugh again," he admitted quietly. Mr. Rowland leaned back in his chair. "They laughed once, didn't they?" he said, and then they bowed. "You earned that. Never forget what happened that day. You don't owe anyone silence." That night, those words echoed in Ethan's mind as he practiced. He played until his fingers ached, but his heart felt light. The notes filled the empty hall, bouncing off the walls like whispers of memory. As the student showcase approached, tension built in the academy. Everyone was preparing their best performances. It was a big event. Important guests, sponsors, and music critics would attend. Winning attention here could change a student's future. Ethan didn't think about winning. He only thought about not letting his teacher or his mother down. When the day of the showcase came, the large auditorium was full. Students sat backstage, nervously waiting for their turns. Ethan's hands were cold. He kept rubbing them together, breathing slowly. He remembered the old piano in the town hall, the sound of his mother's voice telling him to be brave. He whispered those words to himself before stepping on stage. When he sat before the piano, the lights felt too bright. For a second, he couldn't see the audience. Then, as the silence settled, he began to play. He didn't choose a famous song or a technical piece. He played something he had written himself, a simple melody that began softly, almost like a whisper, then grew into something larger, like a rising wave. Every note came from his memory. The laughter of children in his town, the smell of bread from the bakery, the sound of rain on their roof, the moment his mother hugged him goodbye. By the time he finished, the hall was silent. Then the applause came, strong and long. Mr. Rowland stood at the back, watching, his eyes bright with pride. The same people who once looked at Ethan as an outsider now looked at him with admiration. Later that night, when everyone else was celebrating, Ethan quietly went back to his room. He took out the note his mother had written and read it again. "I'm proud of you." He smiled softly and looked out the window at the city lights. He still felt like that small boy from the little town, but now he understood something new. Music wasn't just sound. It was memory, love, and courage. It was the bridge between who he was and who he was becoming. As he sat there in the dim light, he didn't know that this was only the beginning of something far bigger, something that would soon test not only his talent but his heart. For now, he just closed his eyes and listened to the faint hum of the city, hearing music even in the silence. The weeks after the showcase passed quickly, and things began to change for Ethan in quiet ways. People who used to ignore him now smiled when they passed by. Some stopped to ask him about his music. Others asked him to help them with their own piano pieces. He was shy but kind, never showing pride. He always spoke softly, as if afraid to disturb the calm he carried inside. Mr. Rowland became busier with his orchestra, but he always found time to check on Ethan. He often stood silently during Ethan's practice, sometimes saying a few words that meant more than long speeches. Ethan began to understand that learning music wasn't just about the fingers or the notes. It was about patience. Every day he would wake up early, practice before breakfast, attend lessons, and then practice again at night. His hands would ache, but he didn't stop. He wasn't doing it for fame or praise. He was doing it because he loved the feeling when the piano answered him, when every sound he made felt like breathing. Even though he had become more confident, there were still days when he felt small. Some students were jealous of the attention he received. They whispered that he didn't deserve it, that he got lucky because of pity. He heard their words sometimes when he walked past the hallway, but he never said anything back. Instead, he went to the music room and played until the noise in his mind went quiet again. One afternoon, while practicing alone, Mr. Rowland came in quietly and listened for a while. When the song ended, he said, "You still play like it's your last chance. That's good. Don't ever lose that." Ethan looked at him and asked, "How do I know if I'm good enough?" Mr. Rowland smiled faintly. "You don't," he said. "You just keep playing. The world decides later. What matters is what you leave inside the notes." Soon after, something unexpected happened. The Academy received an invitation for their best students to perform at a charity concert in the city's Grand Music Hall. The event was important. Famous artists and sponsors would be there, and it would be broadcast on television. Mr. Rowland decided to take 3 of his best students, and Ethan was one of them. When his name was announced, a wave of murmurs went through the classroom. Some smiled, others frowned, but Ethan just lowered his head and whispered a quiet thank you. The days leading up to the concert were full of rehearsals. The music hall was massive, with gold-trimmed walls and crystal lights that sparkled like stars. It was nothing like the quiet community hall where Ethan had started. Standing on that big stage for the first time made him nervous. He could imagine hundreds of eyes watching him. Mr. Rowland noticed his unease and said, "When you sit at that piano, don't think of the people. Think of the one who first believed in you." Ethan nodded, thinking of his mother. On the day of the concert, everything felt like a dream. The audience filled the hall and the air buzzed with excitement. The lights dimmed, and one by one students performed their pieces. Each performance was met with polite applause. Then came Ethan's turn. He walked to the stage slowly, his hands slightly shaking. He sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes for a second before starting. The first note echoed softly, and the hall grew still. The melody he played was something new, something he had composed in secret, a mix of everything he had felt since leaving his hometown. The music began with a slow, gentle rhythm like a memory. Then it rose and grew stronger, full of hope and courage, then faded again like a whisper of longing. The sound wrapped around the audience, pulling them into his world. Even the other students who had doubted him listened with quiet awe. When the final note ended, there was a moment of silence before the applause began, strong and endless. Ethan stood, bowed slightly, and walked off stage, his heart still racing. Backstage, Mr. Rowland placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "That was the sound of truth." Those words meant more to Ethan than any applause. After the concert, things moved fast. A local newspaper published a story about the boy from a small town who had touched the audience's hearts. Reporters started visiting the academy, asking for interviews. Ethan didn't like attention, but Mr. Rowland guided him through it. "The world needs to hear your story," he said. "It's not about fame. It's about showing that music belongs to everyone, not just to those who can afford lessons." As weeks passed, Ethan received letters from strangers, people who said his music gave them hope, people who said they cried when they heard his performance. He didn't know how to answer most of them, but he read every word carefully. He didn't feel like a star. He still felt like the same boy who played the broken piano alone in that small hall. Sometimes, when things became too loud or busy, he would sneak out of the academy late at night and walk to the park nearby. The park had a small fountain, and when the city grew quiet, he could hear the water's rhythm like soft music. He would sit on a bench and think about home. The smell of his mother's bread, the sound of rain on the roof, the dusty piano keys. Those thoughts reminded him of who he was. One weekend, Mr. Rowland told him there would be another big event, a national youth competition where young musicians from all over the country would perform. It was a chance for recognition and future opportunities. The director wanted Ethan to take part. "It's time people see what real feeling sounds like," he said. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure he could face that kind of pressure. But Mr. Rowland's belief in him gave him courage again. In the following weeks, he practiced more than ever. Sometimes he would stay up past midnight, perfecting every note, changing small parts of the melody until it felt right. He didn't aim to impress the judges. He wanted to tell a story through his music, his story. During one late-night practice while the academy was silent, Mr. Rowland came in and watched him. When Ethan finished, the director said quietly, "That's the sound of someone who knows what pain feels like but refuses to stop dreaming." Ethan didn't know what to say. He just smiled faintly. The day of the competition arrived. The auditorium was filled with hundreds of people, and the judges sat in a line with serious faces. The contestants were older, more experienced, and many came from prestigious schools. Ethan felt nervous but not afraid. He had learned something important. When he played, he wasn't just performing. He was speaking through the piano. When his turn came, he sat down, closed his eyes, and began. The melody started soft, like a quiet confession, then grew stronger and brighter. The audience leaned forward, caught by the emotion in his playing. Every rise and fall in the sound carried a piece of his journey. The dusty old piano, the laughter he had once endured, the moment the director bowed to him. When he finished, there was silence again. Then the crowd stood, applauding loudly. The judges whispered to one another, nodding. Mr. Rowland, sitting at the side, felt his chest tighten with pride. He knew what it meant to watch someone rise from nothing and make the world listen. That night, Ethan won the competition. When they called his name, he walked up to the stage slowly, unsure what to do. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and a trophy was placed in his hands. He didn't smile widely. He just looked down at it quietly, thinking of his mother in that small town where everything had begun. After the ceremony, Mr. Rowland found him outside near the exit. The night air was cool, and the stars hung above the city lights. "You did it," the director said softly. Ethan looked up and asked, "Does this mean I'm a real musician now?" Mr. Rowland smiled. "You were one the day you touched that broken piano," he replied. "This just made the world see it." Ethan laughed gently for the first time that night. "Then I guess I should thank you," he said. "You believed in me when no one else did." Mr. Rowland shook his head. "No," he said. "You believed in yourself when you kept playing despite their laughter. I just happened to listen." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the faint sound of the city. Then Mr. Rowland said, "Tomorrow, take a day off, go home. You've earned it." The next morning, Ethan packed a small bag and boarded a bus back to his town. When he arrived, the streets looked smaller than he remembered, but the air smelled the same, fresh and quiet. He walked to the community hall and pushed open the door. The old piano still stood there, covered in dust. He sat down and pressed a few keys. The sound was off, uneven, but it felt like home. His mother arrived soon after, her eyes filling with tears when she saw him. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "You did it, my son." Ethan smiled and said, "Not yet. I still have a lot to learn." That evening, as the sun set, he played for her just like before. The notes floated softly through the air, reaching beyond the cracked walls of their small home. Neighbors stopped to listen from outside. For them, it was just music, but for Ethan, it was a promise to never forget where he came from and to keep playing for those who believed when no one else did. And as the last light of the day faded, the piano kept singing, carrying the story of a boy who once had nothing but a dream and a heart full of music. When he arrived in the city, everything looked different from the small town he had known all his life. The buildings were tall, the streets were crowded, and people moved fast as if time was always chasing them. The sound of traffic, honking cars, and people talking filled the air. For a boy who had spent his days in quiet corners and small rooms, it was overwhelming. But deep inside, he felt excited. This was the beginning of something new, and he promised himself he would not waste the chance given to him. The music academy where he was to study looked like a palace to him. The tall glass doors, the marble floors, the shining grand piano in the center of the hall, all of it made him feel small. He stood there for a moment, looking around, holding his small bag tightly. The director, who had once laughed at him but later bowed to his talent, welcomed him with a smile. "This is where you'll learn to make your gift even stronger," the man said. The boy nodded silently. The first few days were hard. Everyone around him was skilled and confident. They talked about music theory, notes, scales, and composers he had never heard of. They could read sheet music like reading a book, while he struggled to understand even the basics. When it was his turn to play, he didn't use the sheet at all. He simply closed his eyes and let his fingers find the melody. The sound that came out was beautiful, but some students whispered that it was not proper technique. He could hear them, but he never said anything. He went back to his small dorm room every night and practiced quietly on a small keyboard that had missing keys. The sounds were not perfect, but it was enough for him. Sometimes, he sneaked into the big concert hall when everyone else had gone. He would sit there alone in front of the grand piano and play for hours. His music filled the empty space like a soft wind, echoing through the silent hall. It was his way of speaking to the world without using words. The director often stayed, late at the academy, and one night he passed by the hall and heard the boy playing. He stood quietly by the door, listening. The tune was not from any known piece, it was something personal, something full of heart. The director realized that while others played from their minds, this boy played from his soul. The man smiled slightly and decided not to interrupt. Days turned into weeks, and the boy's hands became faster and more confident. He started to understand the written notes and learned how to combine them with his natural flow. The teachers noticed his progress, and even the students who once looked down on him began to show respect. But the boy never changed. He was still quiet, still humble, still the same dreamer who once played on an old piano in a small hall back home. One day, the director called him into his office. The boy walked in nervously, thinking maybe he had done something wrong. The director pointed to a chair and said, "Sit down." After a moment of silence, he continued, "There's going to be a National Youth Music Gala soon. It's one of the biggest events of the year. I want you to perform there." The boy looked up in surprise. "Me? But there are others who are better," he said softly. The director shook his head. "Maybe they have more training, but none of them can make people feel the way you do. Music is not about perfection. It's about emotion. You have that rare gift." The boy didn't know what to say. He simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you." From that day on, his routine became even more intense. He practiced early in the morning before classes and stayed late after everyone had left. The janitor, who cleaned the hall, often saw him sitting alone at the piano, lost in his music. Sometimes the man would stop and listen, amazed by the sound that came from that small figure. It was as if the piano came alive when he touched it. The days grew shorter, and the date of the gala came closer. Posters appeared around the academy, and his name was listed among the performers. Some of the other students were surprised. A few were jealous, but most were curious to see what he would play. The boy didn't think about competition. All he wanted was to play from his heart and not disappoint the director who believed in him. A week before the performance, something unexpected happened. The boy caught a cold from practicing too long in the cold hall. His throat hurt, his head felt heavy, and his hands trembled. The doctor told him to rest, but he didn't want to stop. Every night he tried to play, even when his fingers ached. One evening, while practicing, he pressed a wrong key and stopped. His frustration grew. He put his hands on his face and whispered to himself, "Maybe I'm not ready." The director found him like that the next morning. "You need to rest," he said kindly. "Pushing too hard won't make you better." The boy shook his head. "I don't want to fail." The director sat beside him. "Do you know why I laughed the first time I saw you play?" he asked quietly. The boy looked at him, unsure how to respond. "I laughed because I didn't believe someone like you could play like that. But when I heard your music, I realized how wrong I was. You don't need to prove anything now. Just remember why you started." Those words stayed with the boy. That night he went back to his room and thought about his small town, his mother, and the broken piano that had taught him everything. He closed his eyes and remembered the first melody he had ever played. It wasn't perfect, but it was pure. That memory gave him strength. By the day of the gala, he had recovered enough to perform. The academy gave him a simple black suit, and the director told him, "Don't think of the crowd, think of your music. Let it speak." The gala was held in a grand theater filled with bright lights and a large audience. Famous musicians, teachers, and families filled the seats. One by one, talented students played beautiful pieces, and the crowd applauded politely. When his name was announced, the boy took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The piano waited in the middle, shining under the lights. He sat down slowly, his heart beating fast. For a moment, he just stared at the keys. The hall was silent. Then he began to play. At first, the sound was soft, almost like a whisper. Then it grew stronger, filled with emotion. Every note told a part of his story: the long nights of practice, the laughter he had faced, the kindness of his mother, and the moment the director had bowed to him. The audience could feel every part of it. Some closed their eyes, others leaned forward as if afraid to miss a single sound. When he finished, there was silence again, just like that first day in the school hall. Then the crowd rose to their feet and clapped. The sound of their applause filled the hall, and the boy stood up slowly, bowing deeply. The director, standing at the side of the stage, felt tears in his eyes. He remembered his own words from long ago, words of doubt that had now turned into pride. After the performance, people rushed to meet the boy. Reporters asked for his story and students congratulated him. But he stayed humble. "I just played what I feel," he said softly. The director came to him, placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You did more than play. You touched hearts tonight." That night, as the boy returned to his room, he looked out of the window at the city lights. They looked like stars scattered across the sky. He thought about his journey, the laughter, the struggle, the sleepless nights, and he smiled. For the first time, he didn't feel small. He felt like he belonged. In the days that followed, news about his performance spread. People called him the boy who made the piano speak. Some said they had never felt such emotion from music before. The director received invitations for the boy to perform in other places, but he didn't tell him right away. He wanted him to rest and enjoy the moment. The boy, however, didn't rest much. He kept practicing, not for fame, but for love. He wanted to learn more, to grow more, and to make his music even better. He wrote letters to his mother, telling her how everything was going, and she replied with simple words of pride and love. Every time he sat at the piano, he remembered her smile. He remembered the old piano in their town and how every sound from it had shaped his dream. Now he was living that dream, and he wanted to make it last. One evening, when the hall was empty again, he sat alone and began playing a new melody, something that came from the deepest part of his heart. The director, walking by, stopped once more at the door. He listened quietly, feeling the same awe he had felt that first night. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, smiling, knowing that the boy he had once doubted had become something truly special. The boy didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of a long journey. A journey that would not just change his life, but also touch many others, who would one day hear his story and believe that dreams can come true if you play them with your heart. The days after the gala felt like a dream that didn't want to end. The boy's performance had reached people far beyond the hall that night. Newspapers printed his photo with words like "a soul that plays the piano" and "the boy who moved the nation." Letters started to arrive at the academy, some from teachers, some from strangers, and some from children who said they wanted to play the piano just like him. It was all new to him. He had never been famous before, and fame felt strange. The director watched quietly as everything changed around the boy. He saw how others now greeted him with respect, how they wanted to sit near him or ask for advice. The boy was polite to everyone, but he never behaved like a star. He still woke up early, helped carry music sheets for the teachers, and practiced in the same quiet corner as always. One afternoon, the director called him into his office again. The boy walked in, unsure what this meeting might be about. The director smiled gently and said, "I have good news. We've been invited to perform at an international concert next month. Musicians from different countries will be there. I want you to play a solo piece." The boy's eyes widened. He couldn't believe it. "Me? Play at a world concert?" he asked in a small voice. The director nodded. "Yes, you've earned it. It's time the world hears what true music feels like." The boy felt both excited and scared. He had never left his country before. The thought of playing in front of so many people made his stomach twist, but he didn't want to refuse. He thanked the director and promised to do his best. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window and looked at the city lights again. He thought about how far he had come, from a small town with a broken piano to a big city and now to a world stage. He whispered softly to himself, "I hope I can make them proud." The next few weeks were full of practice. The director told him to choose a piece that came from his heart. The boy decided not to play something written by a famous composer. Instead, he started to create his own melody, one that carried every memory, every struggle, and every moment that shaped his life. He wanted to make it honest and real, something people could feel even if they didn't understand music. Day after day, he worked on it. Sometimes he got frustrated when a note didn't sound right, or when his hands didn't move as smoothly as he wanted. But each time he reminded himself of the nights he had spent alone at the old piano in his hometown. Back then there had been no one to guide him, only his heart. And that was enough. When the day of travel came, he packed his small suitcase carefully. He didn't own many things, but he carried something special, a small photo of his mother taken in front of their old house. He looked at it for a long time before putting it in his bag. "This is for you," he whispered. The flight to the other country felt long. It was his first time in an airplane. He looked out of the window and watched the clouds drift by, white and soft like dreams floating in the sky. When they landed, he saw a place full of lights and colors, a city much larger than his own. The streets were busy, and people spoke in languages he didn't understand. The concert was to be held in a huge hall with thousands of seats. The stage was wide, and the grand piano looked even more beautiful than any he had ever seen. During the rehearsal, he sat in front of it and touched the keys gently. The sound was rich and full, and he felt a chill down his spine. This was the moment he had worked for. On the night of the concert, the audience was filled with people from around the world, musicians, critics, and lovers of art. The boy waited backstage, trying to calm his breathing. He could hear the other performers play before him, their music powerful and professional. His turn was last. He felt nervous, but when he saw the director standing nearby giving him a small nod of confidence, he took a deep breath. Finally, his name was called. He walked slowly to the center of the stage. The lights were bright, and he could feel hundreds of eyes watching him. He sat down at the piano and looked at the crowd for a moment. Then he closed his eyes and began to play. The first notes were soft, like a whisper of wind. The sound flowed gently through the hall, touching every corner. Then the melody began to rise, strong, emotional, full of life. It was as if he was telling a story without words, a story of a boy who came from nothing, who had faced laughter and doubt, and who now stood in front of the world with music as his only voice. Each part of the piece carried a feeling. The soft section spoke of his mother and the nights when he played alone. The stronger notes told of his struggles, his fear, and his hope. Then came a gentle passage that felt like light breaking through clouds, like the moment when someone finally believes in you. The music grew deeper, more passionate, until the final chord rang through the hall like a heartbeat. When the last note faded, there was silence, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Then slowly the audience began to rise. The applause grew louder and louder until it filled the whole hall. Some people even wiped their eyes. The boy stood up and bowed, his heart pounding. He looked to the side of the stage where the director stood and saw him clapping with a proud smile. After the concert, people came to congratulate him. Reporters asked for interviews, musicians wanted to meet him, and organizers spoke about future events. But the boy didn't think of fame or success. He was just happy that people had felt something from his music. Later that night, after everyone had left, he went back to the empty hall. He sat down again at the piano, placed his hands gently on the keys, and played the same melody softly to himself. This time it wasn't for an audience. It was just for him, for the small boy inside who once dreamed of playing freely. The director entered quietly and watched from a distance. When the boy finished, he said, "You made the whole world listen, but I think the best part was how you listened to your own heart." The boy smiled shyly. "I only played what I felt." When they returned home, the academy welcomed them like heroes. The other students clapped and the teachers praised his performance. The director gave him a few days off, saying he deserved to rest. But resting was never easy for him. Even on his break, he found himself going to the piano room and playing. It was not out of pressure, it was love. Music had become a part of him like breathing. Days turned into weeks again, and life at the academy returned to normal. But something inside the boy had changed. He had seen how powerful music could be, how it could cross borders, languages, and hearts. He wanted to do more than just perform. He wanted to create. He began writing more of his own pieces, simple at first, then more complex. "Write what you know," he would say. "That's where truth lives." Soon, the academy decided to hold a special event featuring only original compositions by students. The boy's name was at the top of the list. When the day came, he played a new piece he had written just a few nights earlier. It was inspired by his journey, the laughter, the doubt, the kindness, and the hope. The melody moved everyone, including the director, who said afterward, "You don't just play music anymore. "You are music." The boy didn't know what to say. He just smiled. Over the next few months, his story continued to spread. Invitations came from different places: music festivals, schools, and charity events. He accepted only a few, choosing to spend more time practicing and helping younger students at the academy. He believed that music was something to share, not to keep. Sometimes, when a new student struggled with a piece, he would sit beside them and say, "Close your eyes and feel the sound. Don't fight it. Let it move you." His calm voice and gentle way made others trust him easily. One evening, after everyone had left, he stayed behind again in the empty hall. He began to play softly, just like he used to when he first came. The janitor, the same old man who had always admired his late-night playing, stopped to listen. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" the man said. The boy smiled and nodded. "A long way indeed. But I think I still have far to go." The janitor chuckled. "Keep going then. The world needs music like yours." As the hall lights dimmed and only the moonlight touched the piano, the boy kept playing, softly, peacefully, with all his heart. He didn't know where life would take him next, but he knew one thing for sure: as long as there was music, he would never be alone. That night, his melody floated through the windows and into the quiet city streets. Some people walking by stopped, looking toward the building where the sound came from. They couldn't see who was playing, but they could feel the warmth in every note, and somewhere in that distant sound, there was the story of a boy who had once been laughed at, who had once played on a broken piano, and who now played for the world, not to be famous, but to remind everyone that dreams, no matter how small, can create music that never fades. The years that followed were full of music, travel, and quiet joy. The boy who once played alone in a dusty room was no longer unknown. He had played in great halls, met other musicians, and touched many hearts with his gentle sound. But even as his fame grew, he never forgot where everything began. Deep inside, he still felt like that quiet child who had nothing but a dream and a piano. Time moved fast, and he became one of the most admired young pianists in the country. People waited eagerly for his performances. They said his music had something that others didn't, something pure, something that spoke to the soul. Whenever he played, he didn't just press the keys. He told stories without words, and those stories reminded people of love, pain, hope, and kindness. But fame was never his goal. He didn't enjoy attention or big crowds. What made him happiest was when someone told him, "Your music helped me through a hard day." That was enough for him. That was the real reward. The director who had discovered him grew older but continued to guide him with patience and care. Their bond was deep, like that of a teacher and a son. They shared many moments together, long talks about music, silence, and life. The director often said, "Music is not just sound. It's how we connect with others without speaking." The boy always remembered those words. One morning, he received a letter from his hometown. It was from the old community center where he had first learned to play. The building was falling apart, and they didn't have the money to fix it. The piano there was broken beyond repair. Reading those words made his heart ache. He remembered the cracked wooden floor, the sunlight through the dusty windows, and the sound of those uneven keys that had once carried his dreams. That evening, he went to see the director. "I want to go home," he said quietly. The director smiled. "It's time, isn't it?" A week later, he returned to the small town. The streets were still the same, the people still kind. When he walked through them, some recognized him from the news, but he didn't act special. He greeted everyone with a smile and walked to the same old building that had started it all. The piano stood in the corner, worn and silent. He ran his hand over the keys, feeling the dust. It didn't work anymore, but to him it was priceless. He decided right then that he would rebuild the place. With help from the academy and some friends, he began the project. The townspeople joined in too, offering what little they could. The sound of hammers and laughter filled the air. Slowly, the old community center began to shine again. New paint covered the walls. New lights hung from the ceiling, and in the middle stood a brand new piano. On the day the center reopened, people gathered from all around. Children filled the front rows, their eyes bright with excitement. The boy, now grown, stood in front of them. "This was where I learned that music can change lives," he said softly. "And now it's your turn." He sat down and played the same melody he had played years ago when everyone laughed at him. But this time no one laughed. Everyone listened. The tune floated through the room like a warm memory returning home. After the performance, he announced something that surprised everyone. From now on, this place will be free for any child who wants to learn music but cannot afford it. No one should be denied the chance to dream. The crowd clapped and cheered. The director, who had traveled from the city to see the event, had tears in his eyes. In the following months, the small town center became alive again. Children came every day after school to learn piano, violin, and singing. The boy taught them patiently. He didn't just teach them how to play. He taught them to feel. Don't try to be perfect, he often said. Try to be honest with your music. Play what's in your heart. He noticed one child in particular, a quiet boy who reminded him of himself. The boy was shy, always sitting at the back, afraid to try. One evening, when everyone had gone home, the pianist found the child still sitting near the piano. "Why didn't you play today?" he asked kindly. The child looked down and whispered, "I'm not good enough." The pianist smiled gently. "Do you know what my teacher once said to me? He said music isn't about being perfect, it's about being real. Would you like to play something now?" The child hesitated, then nodded. His small hands touched the keys, playing uneven notes, unsure but full of effort. The sound was rough, but the older man listened with patience and pride. When the child stopped, he said, "That's how it begins. Keep going. One day your music will speak for you." The child smiled shyly, and something changed in his eyes, a spark of belief. The pianist knew that this was why he had come back. Not for fame, not for applause, but to give others what he had once been given, a chance. The director often visited the town to see how things were going. He and the pianist would sit together after the lessons, drinking tea and talking about life. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, the director said quietly, "You've done something special here. You've turned your gift into light for others." The pianist looked at the sky, the soft orange glow fading into dusk, and replied, "I just followed the same path you showed me." The director smiled. "And now they'll follow yours." Time continued to move gently, as it always does. The pianist played in a few more concerts, but spent most of his time at the community center. He wrote new music too, pieces that were calm and full of hope. Some were inspired by the children, some by the sound of rain on the roof, and some by memories of his younger self. One day, a famous music organization contacted him. They wanted to give him an award for his contribution to art and education. When they invited him to the ceremony, he was thankful, but he asked them if he could bring the children from his town to play instead. The organizers agreed. On the day of the ceremony, the stage was filled with young faces. The pianist stood behind them as they played the melody he had taught them, the same one that had once changed his life. The crowd was amazed at the simplicity and beauty of the sound. When it ended, the hall filled with applause. The host came on stage and handed him the award, saying, "You have not only mastered music, but have taught the world how to feel it." The pianist took the award quietly, then handed it to the children and said, "This belongs to all of us." The director, sitting in the front row, stood up and clapped with a proud smile. He remembered the very first time he had seen the boy, shy and trembling, sitting at a piano while everyone laughed. Now the same boy had made a world full of laughter and joy through his music. After the event, the pianist and the director took a quiet walk outside. The night was peaceful and the stars were bright. "You've made me proud," the director said softly. The pianist smiled and replied, "You made me believe." They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps mixing with the gentle breeze. Years later, when the director grew old and could no longer travel, the pianist often visited him. They would sit together by the window, listening to the recordings of his performances. One day the director said, "Do you remember what I told you when you first came to the academy?" The pianist nodded. "You said music is not about perfection. It's about emotion." The director smiled faintly. "And you proved it." When the day came that the director was gone, the pianist played a quiet piece in his memory. It was soft, full of love and gratitude. There were no words, only music, because sometimes words are not enough. As he played, he could almost feel the director standing beside him, smiling like before. After that day, the pianist continued his work, teaching and composing. His school grew bigger and more children came from different towns. Each one carried a small part of his dream. One evening, long after everyone had gone home, he sat at the piano alone again. The hall was quiet except for the gentle hum of the night. He placed his hands on the keys and played the melody that had started everything. The notes filled the room, tender and warm. He thought of the day when the director had laughed at him, the day when he had played his heart out, the day when the laughter turned into applause. He thought of his mother, his small town, and all the faces that had shaped his journey. The music rose softly like a memory returning home. Each note carried a story, a smile, a tear, a dream. He closed his eyes and let it all flow. When the final note faded, the room was silent. He sat there for a long time, smiling to himself. The world outside was quiet, but inside that small hall, the sound of his journey still lived on. In every key, every echo, every heart he had touched. And in that moment, he knew one thing clearly. The laughter that once tried to break him had turned into a melody that would never end.